Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Selling AI. Today, we're diving into what is possibly one of the more contrarian applications of AI I've come across, using it to measure leadership capacity from the way people actually talk at work. I have Logan Yonavjak on the show today, and Logan is the co-founder and CEO of Readiness Engine, an AI-informed diagnostic platform, runs signal analysis on your real work transcripts, all hands, board meetings, internal calls, to really surface whether a leader can actually, what she calls, hold complexity under pressure, which we'll dive much deeper into. In today's episode, Logan and I talk about what linguistic patterns reveal about leadership readiness, why most AI sales coaching tools are scoring the wrong things, and how she sells an AI diagnostic tool into a market that's drowning in AI pitches. We'll also get into the uncomfortable question of whether AI is not exposing the managers who maybe weren't ever really coaching their teams. All right, let's get into it. Logan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Warren. What a great intro.
Great. I'm glad. It's always a little bit of pressure to try to intro someone and not be under lofty for the work someone's doing. So cool. Well, listen, you spent 20 years just really broadly in what we called impact finance. Tell us about your journey and how did that lead you to build like an AI diagnostic platform for leadership readiness? What was the pattern you kept on seeing that just made it so you had to build this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I spent a fair amount of my intellectual brain power on understanding how capital flows and understanding portfolio dynamics, and specifically really interested in alternatives investing and real assets. So I was pretty specifically going in a direction of working to deploy capital for good. And in my case, it meant improving environmental outcomes, improving social outcomes, community outcomes. So widening the aperture of what people think of in terms of investment returns alongside financial returns. And so I really dove into the capital markets and understanding the investment landscape. I have an MBA from Yale in asset management and also a master's in forestry. So what I was trying to accomplish there was, again, understanding how capital is deployed. And then what I realized over time, or spent more time thinking about, was the leadership behind, behind the deployment of capital. So the family office, especially in the alternative space, you have family offices, you have sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, this whole kind of like ecosystem of players. And behind them are people making decisions. And especially in the alternative space, and as you get earlier and earlier in investment deployment, you're investing in people more than you're investing in the actual technology or product in some cases. So I got really interested in like how decisions were being made about who was going to lead a company, how the team was constructed, and also the leaders behind it, like realizing that there were limitations I was seeing in managers, in leaders. And I'd had sort of this thread of interest all along since high school in Jungian analysis. Jung was like the founder of psychotherapy in this country in many ways. Not in this country, he's from Europe, but he really influenced modern psychotherapy. And so I was interested in like the Myers-Briggs personality test and some of these other leadership assessments. And I just got to thinking, like, how are these being used in investment decision making? And it seemed like there was a lack of kind of deployment of these, especially in early stage investing. And so that's where the business idea came from for Readiness Engine.
Interesting. Let's peel into that just a little bit further before we actually dive into Readiness Engine. Um, it's a really good point. I'll stay in my realm, which is venture capital, right? Especially early stage venture capital. The who matters a lot to investors, right? Who are they investing in? Both from an expertise standpoint, do they know the space that they're trying to build into and sell into? But secondarily, do they have the aptitude to be a founder or an early stage, someone who can build an early stage company? In my perspective, most of that's done by gut feel or like maybe a couple of check boxes, right? Like we're like, listen, I'm looking for these 3 personality traits. It seems like that's really underweight. It's overweighted. It's weighted well in the ideology space. They think about this, but it's not weighted in the actual evaluation piece. Would you
Exactly.
say that you found the same? Is there like a mix that you feel like is there that should be like, are you trying to tilt that mix somewhat?
Yeah, I think that's really well characterized. So basically, a lot of a lot of weight is given to the people and investing in the people and the team, but the actual like rigor of that is mixed. And I would say, just like with any other skill, there are some investors who do have a knack for finding talent. Their gut feeling and pattern recognition is superior to others, but everyone thinks they're that person. And so there's sort of this like this bias people have of over-aggrandizing their skill set. And this happens in all sorts of ways with human beings. People tend to not want to be average in some things. So it's not like it's just specific to VC investors, but that's what I've run across in talking to about 150 VCs about this topic is that most of them have this perspective, and the way that they go about making decisions is based on gut feel, warm intros, kind of like the halo effect. It's in some cases. So there's kind of a variety of different ways decisions are being made. Very few of them, I'd say less than 10%, are using any sort of like people analytics that's standardized. I have heard a few recently. Um, Andreessen Horowitz, there's a few kind of big names that are starting to get into this. So I don't want to dismiss that that's not happening, but just by and large, that's just not the way things are right now. So we set out to create a product and platform that could really service this segment. And so that's where we started we've since pivoted to a large degree, but that's where we started.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably the only area within an investment thesis where it's okay that I have a knack for something. Like nowhere else would be like great. Like, the when you do the modeling, the financial returns don't come back to like be positive in a way that I should make the investment. But you know what? I have a knack for understanding that returns are better than like the analysis will say. No one would take that approach. But in this space, a knack for people is perfectly acceptable, right? Like, and you're absolutely
It's so
right. Take an
fascinating.
example. Yeah,
It's a conundrum. And it's a paradox. And I think in some cases I just want to be clear, like I'm not coming in with the attitude of, better analytics will solve problems. Or will solve all of our problems. This is not a silver bullet, like getting analytics on the people. Gut feeling can be very valid, and patterns and biases can be positive and negative. So it's not like we should just totally take over human decision making. We should augment it, in my opinion, just like we have with many other analytical tools with pattern recognition approaches like AI, like what we've built. And so I try to just be clear with people. It's not like we're saying, "Hey, don't use your gut."
agreed.
We're just
No, you
saying,
should supplement it. Right.
why not
Exactly
have
right.
this third
For
party evaluation? Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, listen, let's dive into Readiness Engine. Let's start with the broad idea, what you broadly are trying to achieve. And then I want to dive into like the inputs and the outputs. So in particular for Readiness Engine, when you're going in, you're trying to solve a problem for an organization. What is that problem that you're trying to solve and how do you solve it?
Yeah, so in talking about business outcomes, things like reducing execution risk. So when there's goals, quarterly goals or annual goals, you want to be able to meet those goals. And most of the times that those don't get met, it has to do with people's decision-making process. And, if you drill down, that could be anywhere from team friction. It could be related to someone's emotional resilience. They get overwhelmed and stressed, so there's all these sorts of human factors that can prevent or um, accelerate decision making in positive or negative ways. And so also employee retention, keeping people happy at work, making sure that they feel motivated. Those figures are declining. And we can see kind of broad patterns in that in corporate America. And so, how do we come in and how does our tool relate to that? Well, we're evaluating a number of different what we call constructs within individuals and teams. And we are trying to illuminate patterns that will help prevent some things like execution risk, help improve employee retention and employee satisfaction, improve promotion and succession decisions so that people don't flame out in 18 months, things like that.
Excellent. Yeah. When you talked about this from a process perspective, Um, what kind of data are you analyzing? And then what kind of types of outputs are you looking for to kind of like dive into reducing execution risk, improving employee satisfaction?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is there's two pathways. Someone can sit down and take an assessment. So that's a one-way video interview where they're asked open-ended and scenario-based questions. Many of us might have been through cases or, any unstructured interview. You're basically doing the same thing. You're talking about yourself for a period of time. We're capturing that transcript data. So then we can also just capture transcript data. We can take call notes, we can take meeting notes, transcripts from presentations, and we can do the same analysis. So once we get the transcript data, we're looking at things like how it's called a bot. It's the approach is called quantitative linguistics. So you're breaking down paragraph and sentence structure, and you're looking for patterns in things like how someone makes reference to experiences they've had, how many perspectives they're bringing in, what ways they've built systems around themselves to augment stress. Like there's just a variety of different things we're drawing out so that we can um, create a measurement factor around things like how does this person handle stress? How good are they at juggling complexity and juggling a bunch of balls at once objectively? How coachable is this person, like in terms of fixed or flexible identity? Like those are all things that we can tease out from the transcript data.
Interesting. And you're using live transcript data as well, like you'd be ingesting calls that teams are having internal to themselves, right? If I'm the VP of sales, you're taking the transcript from my weekly all hands with the entire sales team, for example, and seeing how everyone's interacting on that call.
Yes, and then there's the team piece, which is like we can track kind of team development over time. Like if you isolated the the sort of like aspect of relational intelligence, just how people are relating to one another and the psychological safety and the motivation of that team and how it's changing and tracking over time. And again, that can lead or not to decision drag or friction points that could come up, and we can predict those more accurately if we have this data. So.
Gotcha. Interesting. The parallel I took from it, and to use a belabored sports metaphor here, it's like in, let's say, both the NBA and NFL, there's all kinds of like physical tracking devices on athletes. How fast are they running? How are they fatiguing
Yeah.
to try to prevent injury and reduce practice loads or increase practice loads or reduce strain or increase strain when necessary, right? In the scenario, like most of what's happening at work is you're meeting with your colleagues, right? So like, and most decisions are made in a group setting in a meeting as well. So like, you're kind of using that. This is the live physical data that athletes have, but in the workplace. Um, we've had this there's been this technology around for like 15 years. I remember at Apple about a decade ago, we talked to a vendor we were going to wear a card that acted as a microphone so we could see this type of data in the meeting. And most of it was superficial data. How often did you talk? They were looking for things like psychological safety and those types of things in the meeting. How is the leader interacting with you? I imagine there's a big leap with LLMs, but describe it for me. What's possible now? What's the leap that AI and generative AI can give us now that we process this data that we didn't have 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Well, the way that this field of psychology that underpins our assessment was tracked before AI was human scoring. It's one of the reasons it stayed in academia for so long is that you would have people speak and then they would take the transcripts and someone would have to hand score and they would have to be trained to do that. And so that's one of the kind of big leaps. And now we can do ingest, obviously higher volumes of data at a lower cost more rapidly. And so there's just an opportunity to democratize and disseminate this type of information into workplaces at a rate that has never been available before without these academic specialists. And we're partnering with a lot of these organizations too to continue to up our game and so it's an exciting time to see the field kind of coming alive with AI. But yeah, I mean there's also once you get bigger pools of data, I mean some of our counterparts who've been in vertical development have amassed like huge volumes, huge data sets, which can now be analyzed for outcomes and looking more at predictive analytics. And one of my favorite areas that I think once we have the data, the piles of data that we can start analyzing trends, we can look at functionally where do people at different levels are they best situated and with what team members are they going to be most effective. And so we can start looking at breaking this down by industry and job function. And that just gets really exciting in my opinion, because it's not like anyone is bad or good, or that it's better or worse to be at different developmental levels. It just means that you might be suited for certain jobs rather than others. Um, like, for instance, I think there's a lot of hype around being a startup founder, and it's actually requires a lot of these skills, like, or not skills, but it requires the ability to hold complexity, to really hold pressure, to be able to pivot quickly. Like, not everyone really has that. And so would they really want to be the CEO or be suited for that? Or maybe there's a different role on the team, or maybe there's just decide, I'm going to do something a little bit more within a big team or organization where I have my lane that's a bit more structured for now. Um, yeah.
That's awesome. Before we dive, I want to dive into specifically maybe like a sales leadership angle. What I want to kind of pull into is this. Bring up a good example with there is a cachet around being a startup founder that people think has been around forever. It's really only been around since the mid 2010s, 2015, when Y
Oh,
Combinator
nice.
started to
That's good. I've
grow.
never heard anyone pinpoint it before.
No, it's really it wasn't that cool to be a startup founder. Startup founder, I actually kind of attributed it to two things. You had Y Combinator grow, and they started putting out some courses around what it takes to build a startup. And then you had the startup podcast, which was in like 2014, 2015, where I was walking through the journey of building their own startup, which included the podcast, right? Before that, there was a technology, like a Steve Jobs level cachet, not a Sam Altman and the thousands of founders that have come out of this kind of Y Combinator generation here. So
Yeah.
like it's relatively new and it's increasing and it's great because I think smaller segments of entrepreneurial businesses servicing a niche market is a really good market transition. So that's wonderful. What I'd take it to though is I've often thought I am a pretty structured corporate guy. I was UPS is almost like a militaristic kind of view of like hierarchy. You never talk to your boss's boss about something that your boss doesn't know about,
Gotcha.
right?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
so very structured. Apple was different. It was very broad, and I actually struggled a little bit at Apple. You don't know who to go to for what. Like you build relationships to mesh yourself through the organization. But I'm a corporate fella. I like process. I like these things. Those are actually kind of counterintuitive to being a good startup founder. I actually find I have to push myself out of a box of like, what's the alternative viewpoints that I should be taking in order to build really what is like an alternative business, right? Like it's an anti-corporate organization. And I personally struggle with that. My point being with this, what's like a counterintuitive data point that you would find that would lead to a kind of counterintuitive result for leadership, right? Like, hey, we find that leaders who talk like X, Y, and Z either thrive or struggle in this type of environment that you found along the way.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think some people with higher developmental levels tend to be slower movers in decision making. So, one example is we have one of our early founders that took the assessment, the formal assessment. He came out as having like a high level of relational intelligence. So we have 6 measures that we look at, and one of them is relational intelligence. We call it like relational and emotional IQ. And so he came out really high there. He really likes getting feedback from his team, and he's very open. He's very coachable in the sense that like his identity is flexible. He's not like defensive about taking feedback. So he'll really kind of hold court with people and take in feedback all day. And then when it comes to making a hard decision or a pivot, he struggles there. So that was illuminated in the results. And that dynamic we see a lot with especially impact oriented or like mission oriented founders, where they've kind of reached this level of strategic complexity and vision in their lives. They've done enough interdisciplinary thinking and self-work that they're sort of seeing the system in a new way and seeing possibilities to fix the system, but they are almost paralyzed by all of the possibilities of how to solve the system. And then if you bring in like a higher relational intelligence, there's even more information coming in. So people can kind of get deer in the headlights a bit And people at a slightly lower level of development tend to be very fast movers and able to pivot more quickly. So there's this kind of counterintuitive thing there where like you want to pair a visionary founder with someone who's almost like a better pivoter and more directionally focused. And so, yeah, that's one of the patterns that have found most fascinating.
That is interesting. If you think about it, I mean, see if I can simplify that, right? Like, so move fast and break stuff. I think meta ethos is dumb in most scenarios, right? Like, that's just dumb ethos, right? Like, that's in some scenarios in meta, it worked, right? Like these moonshot businesses
Yeah.
works, right? On the flip, like sourcing a wide variety of opinions before making a decision is a good thing, right? In a lot of scenarios, but and there are a decent amount, especially in the entrepreneurial sense, right, of like startups where a stubbornness in decision making and moving fast and pivoting is what's needed for the business, and you might that's not holding court and sourcing a whole bunch of opinions, and that's not moving slow and making the right decision. It's like kind of breaking both those like normalcies, right? Like where like you should you have to kind of be stubborn in your opinion making and to make some of these really challenging decisions not be kind of like frozen by the indecision.
Yeah,
That's really
exactly.
interesting. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a good counter take because that's not how most people would want to behave at work. And I actually find that again, not to overemphasize on the founder piece, founders were bad at corporate life. And that's why they're founders, right? They weren't like, and that's why they're good at founders, right? Like, and so you have to kind of like when people go work at a startup for a first time, I'm like, you should be prepared for this. It's going to be unorganized. It's not going to be run well, right? Like bad decisions. You think bad decisions are going to be made because these people like it's not corporate. Corporate is where everyone comes to slow decisions together, right? Like and coalesces around a safe choice. That's not a startup, right? So like your founders aren't built like that. I still have to wonder. I'm still on the fence 10 years in if I'm on what side of the fence I'm in there. So
I know.
that's,
It can be complicated. Sometimes, the grass is always greener too.
yeah.
Um,
You know, that
so
I'll go one more question before we go into the sales side. So you're a founder, like you talk about self reflection and this type of development. How does how does your analysis push you towards specific directions as you kind of build this journey with Readiness Engine?
well, what came out in my assessment was that I needed to be more transparent on how I was making like the frameworks and dimensions of the system I was working with to make decisions and voicing that in real time with people because I think I'm dealing with a lot of complexity, but I tend to keep it internal. Especially when things need to move quickly, I don't necessarily take the time to explain like all the pieces I'm working with. So that came up. And then also naming uncomfortable emotions in real time. So like there's this edge of picking up on, maybe there's like a disturbance in the force, to use some Star Wars language, but you just kind of move on because you need to move quickly. And instead, like again, voicing that so that people feel seen and heard in the uncomfortable emotion. And that sort of sets the scene for more psychological safety and people feeling like they can show up and be seen at work. So those are kind of two areas that like I personally that showed up in my results as like growth edges for me. So
That's
I'm much
awesome.
more aware of them. Yeah. It's been a good thing to get things out of my head and like out towards, the shared space.
That's great. That's really fascinating. Growth edges is a good way to put that as well. So cool. Okay. I'd like to dive into some maybe let's say tactical items from the leadership side. And I think being that this is a sales podcast, we'll try to put this into a sales bucket. So let's put ourselves in the scenario of a VP of sales. I think there's two key areas that you talked about that I find interesting here. Let's talk about hiring. You talk about how like certain people work well with certain other types of personalities, right? Is there anything assessment wise that you kind of gear towards like how you hire, how you build your team, both that they work well with you, but also cover up some of your blind spots? How do you kind of like analyze data, figure out what those blind spots might be and push someone towards the right team building?
Well, we can either have them both take the assessment or an assessment, or we can analyze team, transcripts where they're both involved, or we can analyze multiple transcripts of both of them and then run the same analysis. So it's really just uh, factor of we've found that the main thing is translating the results in a way that people can digest. So it's taking the same results we have, but then talking about patterns in between, like, that example I mentioned about the founder who was really high in his relational intelligence, but then he had trouble kind of pivoting. So we would try to find someone with that higher degree of like pivoting quickly, and then try to support him in finding that person, or looking for some, if it's a larger company, looking for someone who could support him, keep him accountable. So I think it's just a matter of like you need both sets of data, and then you have to look at the overlaps and the gaps and risk factors, and that's just an exercise that's available.
Awesome. Okay, great. Let's talk about maybe the team dynamics. I'm a VP of sales. I have 8 sales directors that report to me, maybe a VP, maybe a RevOps person and a sales enablement person. That's my team. What kind of like patterns are you looking for? And let's say how that leader interacts with their teams. How do you create psychological safety? What kind of like indicators do you see of a pro and a con of those types of things? What tactically can we take away from this as a leadership question?
Yeah, I think the psychological safety and creating we call it like presence. It's almost like people are looking to match the nervous system of who they're working with. And so, I mean, there's a couple different ways I could answer that. One is um how like 360s are a really good way to actually augment what we're doing, and we are able to kind of expedite the 360 process by taking in transcript data and sort of adding it to the mix. But like how people respond to a leader, and how they describe their experience with that leader is just that's gold, because you can't really have the person only describing how they think their team is responding. So you kind of have to get that input from the team. But like foundationally, you want there to be a flow state between people and the folks they work with or manage, in that those people can show up with a relaxed nervous system, which opens up the cognitive and executive functioning of the brain, which helps us solve problems and motivate ourselves. If we're in a fear state or in a state of anxiety around someone, it's going to shut down some of our creative thinking and some of our ability to execute and perform tasks. We're going to be resentful. So much flows from that dynamic of being able to hold space in a safe way. And some of that's communication skills. Like you can pinpoint how someone is speaking to other people in transcripts, like whether they're using short, curt sentences, whether they're saying things like, um, what I heard from you, like acknowledging people's responses. So there's a lot of like sentence structures you can pull out to analyze from
Interesting.
there. But I just guess I wanted to say foundationally, you're just looking to create a flow state where your team can show up with where their nervous system is ready to perform, rather than shut down because they're afraid you're going to yell at them or um, retaliate or something.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a common theme that I might talk about every episode now is that a lot of what you're talking about are tried and true kind of leadership, let's say enterprise analysis kind of like tactics, right? A 360 we've been doing for 30, 40 years, right? We take a survey and you ask people how they feel about you. Um, but I think with the technology now, again, I think the simplest way is you take it from a human scoring mechanism to an AI scoring mechanism that's much better at pattern matching than we were before, and actually gives you an ability to get much more robust as to what patterns you're looking for because you have more data to analyze, right? Rather than a human just using a subjective kind of approach to what they know. And again, the knack for the scenario there, right? I would say that. Would you say that this is a right or wrong statement? I think most leaders have no idea whether they're creating an environment of like psychological safety
I would
that
agree with
fosters
you. I mean,
creativity, right?
yeah.
Like, I have no clue. It's probably somewhere in the investment conversation. Everyone would assume they do, and they have no idea how they're doing it or if it's true that they do. That seem like the right kind of like paradigm there?
Um, Yeah, I think there's a couple dimensions that I think we all have a felt sense of what's going on with someone if we really pay attention. But I think people have different priorities in their work and different skill sets that they intrinsically, and then for whatever cultural or familial reasons, have honed in on. So it's a broad mix of skill level, with that. And so and then there's the tiredness factor, there's the lack of paying attention factor because you're looking at your phone. There's all sorts of reasons to have more standardized data to draw from. Um, like, if nothing else, there's this great study that was done of, and I need to get this correct citation, but basically it was looking at judges making determinations throughout a day. And in the beginning of the day, they were more lenient on people, and after lunch, they were harder on people. And basically, more people were convicted. These were like, I think, petty crimes. That they were studying. But what I found interesting about it was that even someone whose job it is to perform like a judgment on a case, they can get tired or grumpy or just irritated, for even at different points in the day. And so you're not necessarily getting the same person consistently. And so I think we need to think about those risk factors, even with the people who are great at reading other people and great at holding teams. So those, I don't know, I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, and I'm like, nothing's really convinced me that it's not good to have this information.
No, you're absolutely correct. I use that example. That's a Daniel Kahneman study, Thinking Fast, Slow, that talks about that judge use case. I
What
think about
was?
this all the
Okay, okay.
time. Yes,
Thank you.
because it's one
I
of the
heard it on
better
the radio,
better
and I can't
arguments
even
for
yeah.
the whole book is chock full of just those, right? Judgments being more skewed than you think. I use this argument all the time for AI augmenting human relationships because there's a lot more that goes into play. So, for example, most sales leaders have coaching calls once a week with all their AEs. I have a coaching call with Jim at 8, Sally at 9, Tom at 10, and Jill at 1. And Tom is probably getting a much worse coaching call because I am hungry at 10 o'clock and I've done 3 in a row than the other AEs. And structurally, that'll just always be the same. And honestly, it's probably a huge impact, 30-40% of the way. So what should be happening is we make a case for AI. That's a case for it. That should supplement. I should still be the coach, but I should be looking for these patterns in the conversation I'm having, using something that doesn't get hungry at 10 o'clock in the afternoon. I have 3 podcasts scheduled in a row. I am petrified that my third podcast, I'll seem a lot less interested. So I'll have to overly focus on this. So you're absolutely right. Having the data,
Glad I
having
got
the
you early
conversation
in the
data.
day. I got you early in the
Yeah,
day.
you did. You got the first one. So you got me at my brightest here. That's excellent. So maybe one last question before we dive into one last question. When you look at when you're selling this product, who is most interested in this type of like analysis? Are you going to HR? Is this an HR problem? Is it a senior leadership, CEO, founder? Who do you go to and say, hey, I have this technology to help better execute decisions by solving the interpersonal problems that you're having in the organization?
Mostly senior leadership and L&D professionals have been kind of the sweet spot. Our We've honed in on our ICP being growth stage companies that are in some sort of high growth, high innovation industry that really need to solve, like either manage their team growing quickly, solve for complexity, solve for execution risk, look at promotion. I've looked. The senior leadership at a few boards have been interested in succession planning. So yeah, I would say definitely the senior leaders and the L&D professionals have mostly been our focus area.
Cool. That's great. Okay, last question. So, with generative AI, we're obviously in the early stages of leveraging this technology, improving the models, although I think we've hit a relatively leveled off point here. What do you think might be possible 3 years from now that you're thinking about, but we aren't quite there yet from a technology standpoint that we can implement?
Well, one of the things that gets me most excited is the idea of having everyone having an angel on their shoulder. And what I mean by that is our second brains all being developmentally trained through a coach, like an AI coach or agent, to be at our top level of development and know us because of the data we've fed it and the patterns in our own individuality, and then be able to inform decisions and do role playing with other people's highest selves to fix problems and to get through difficult conversations that may have really run into roadblocks because of the egos involved with other,
Yeah.
the real people. I think there's just a really exciting opportunity as we develop second brains, and as we develop ourselves more systematically using some of these developmental tools. That's like a future that I think is possible and just not quite here yet.
Yeah. It's a really good example because the like generative AI technology is there for that at this point. I think the two things to solve is like structuring how that data flows in and out of your day. And so like how do you provide that right context? And two, just the trust level of how you manage conversations, right? We're still trying to figure this out on our end, right? In theory, what should happen is every conversation that happens across the whole organization should be shared in an organizational database that everyone has access to and is able to be analyzed, and you trust it in a way that no one's coming for your job or scolding you for something that like came up in a meeting or a decision that you made along the way. Breaking that trust barrier, finding the right way to share information, step down from that because not everybody in the org should have every conversation. It'd be the interesting part of how to solve this kind of like enterprise conversation bucket here, which I'm really fascinated to see how it gets solved. All the way. Cool. Great. Logan, if people wanted to find you, where can they find you? Do you post on LinkedIn? Do you have anywhere that you write or you go to any events?
Definitely on LinkedIn, and then readinessengine.io is our website. You can contact us through the contact form. That pretty much goes to me. And yeah, I do go to conferences, but they're varied. I feel like I don't have like a stable set of conferences yet. We're sort of still figuring out the right mix, but definitely LinkedIn or our
Awesome. That's
website.
great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing where you take the technology. It really touches on a key theme that we talk about all the time. We're worried about AI breaking human relationships. I think there's an opportunity where it really elevates them.
Yeah. Well said.
Awesome. Logan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Appreciate it.